throughout history, powerful men have had a convenient solution for inconvenient women. Declare them mad. Mad enough to lock away. Mad enough to strip of power. Mad enough to erase from history while they're still breathing. And nowhere is this more chillingly apparent than in the story of a queen who ruled 2 kingdoms, yet spent nearly 50 years behind locked doors. Her name was Juana of Castile. To history, she's known as Juana la Loca, Joanna the Mad. But was she? Or was she simply a woman who stood between powerful men and the throne they wanted? She was declared Queen of Castile in 1504. By 1509, she was a prisoner. For 46 years, she lived in confinement at the castle of Tordesillas, while men ruled in her name. Her father took her throne. Her husband schemed to steal it. Her son inherited it and never let her go. And all of them spread the same lie, that she was too insane to rule. But those who actually spoke with her, the rebels who freed her, the servants who attended her, even the ambassadors who broke through to see her, testified that she was intelligent, lucid, and fully aware of what had been stolen from her. The court said she was mad. The evidence says she was trapped. This is the story of Juana of Castile, a queen who was erased before she died, a woman whose grief was twisted into evidence of insanity, a ruler whose imprisonment wasn't about her mental state. It was about power, plain and simple. And it's a story that asks one terrifying question. How many women throughout history were declared mad simply because men found them inconvenient? Juana was born on November 6, 1479, in Toledo, the heart of the Kingdom of Castile. She was the 3rd child of 2 of the most powerful monarchs in Europe, Queen Isabella I of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon. Their marriage had united Spain. Their conquest of Granada in 1492 would complete the Reconquista. They were the Catholic monarchs, and their children were destined to shape Europe. But Juana was never meant to rule. She had an older sister, Isabella, and an older brother, Juan, the heir to both crowns. Juana was beautiful, fair-skinned, with auburn hair and blue eyes like her mother, and remarkably intelligent. She mastered Castilian, Catalan, Portuguese, Latin, and French. She could dance, play the clavichord, and debate theology. By all accounts, she was the brightest of Isabella and Ferdinand's children. But she was also moody, sullen, preferring solitude to the rigid rituals of court. Some historians suggest she may have questioned her parents' extreme Catholic faith, a dangerous thing in the age of the Spanish Inquisition. Others note that she was subjected to torture, suspended by ropes with weights attached to her feet, a method called la cuerda, for religious disobedience. Whether this was done at her mother's order or her father's remains debated, but the fact remains. Juana learned early that questioning authority came with consequences. As a 3rd child, her destiny was marriage, not power. And in 1496, at 16 years old, she got exactly that. Juana was married to Philip of Austria, the son of the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I. Philip was known as the Handsome for his steel blue eyes and fair hair. And from the moment Juana met him, she was utterly, hopelessly in love. The marriage was political, an alliance between the Habsburgs and the Spanish crowns. But for Juana, it was passionate, consuming, all-encompassing. The wedding took place in Leer, near Brussels, on October 20th, 1496. By all accounts, there was genuine passion at the start. Juana was 16, eager to escape the oppressive piety of her parents' court. Philip was 18, charming, and everything Spain wasn't. Cosmopolitan, sophisticated, part of the glittering Burgundian court culture. For a brief moment, it seemed like love. But Philip's idea of marriage was very different from Juana's. He was attracted to his young bride physically, but emotionally, he had no interest in fidelity. In the Burgundian court, taking mistresses was standard aristocratic behavior, barely even scandalous. Almost immediately after the wedding, Philip began his affairs. And Juana, who loved him with an intensity that bordered on obsession, spiraled into jealous rage. The stories from Flanders are dramatic and disturbing. When Juana discovered Philip with a rival, she reportedly cut off the woman's hair and attacked her face with scissors. She would throw herself against walls in despair when Philip abandoned her after their arguments, bruising herself, screaming until her voice gave out. She refused to eat, refused to sleep, pacing endlessly through palace corridors and muttering to herself. Court observers described her as increasingly erratic, violent, uncontrollable. Philip's response was calculated and cruel. Whenever Juana became too much, too emotional, too jealous, too demanding, he would simply leave. He'd ride off to Flanders or disappear to another mistress's bed, using her outbursts as justification. "See how mad she is?" he'd say to anyone who would listen. "See how impossible she is to live with?" He isolated her from her Spanish attendants, replacing them with his own Flemish courtiers, who reported every breakdown, every rage, every moment of despair back to him. And then he'd come back, shower her with affection until she calmed down, and the cycle would begin again. It was psychological warfare disguised as marriage. And crucially, he began spreading rumors that his wife was mad. Not just emotional, not just jealous, mad, unfit, unstable. It was convenient propaganda, because by 1497, everything had changed. Juana's older brother Juan died at 19. His pregnant wife Margaret delivered a stillborn daughter. Then Juana's older sister Isabella died in childbirth. Her baby son Miguel survived only 2 years. By 1500, all the heirs were dead. Juana, the moody third child who was never supposed to matter, was now heiress to Castile and Aragon. She would inherit 2 kingdoms and an empire that stretched from Spain to the New World. And Philip realized his wife wasn't just a woman he could control. She was the key to unimaginable power. When Queen Isabella died in 1504, Juana became Queen of Castile. But her father, Ferdinand, immediately proclaimed himself governor and administrator of Castile, citing his daughter's infirmities. What were these infirmities? The official documents don't specify. They're described vaguely as conditions that, for the sake of her honor, are not expressed. In other words, we can't say exactly what's wrong with her, but trust us, something is. Philip wasn't about to let Ferdinand control what should have been his wife's, and therefore his, kingdom. In 1506, he sailed to Spain with Juana to claim the throne. The Castilian nobles, tired of Ferdinand's rule, rallied to the young couple. Ferdinand saw he was outmaneuvered, so he did what he'd always done. He schemed. He met privately with Philip and offered a deal. Philip could have control of Castile's government. But in exchange, Juana would be declared incapable of ruling and confined. Ferdinand would return to Aragon. Philip would rule Castile. And Juana, the actual queen, would be locked away. Both men signed the agreement. Neither asked Juana. But before the plan could be fully enacted, Philip died suddenly in September 1506. The official cause was typhoid fever, though some whispered poison. He was 28 years old, and Juana, 6 months pregnant with her 6th child, fell apart. What happened next became the foundation of the legend of Juana la Loca. The stories are dramatic, gothic, horrifying. They say she refused to bury Philip's body, that she had the coffin travel with her everywhere, to the dinner table, to her bedside, that she would open it to gaze at his decomposing corpse, kiss his feet, talk to him as if he were still alive, that she allowed no woman near the coffin, her jealousy extending even to his corpse. It's a good story. It's been painted, dramatized, turned into opera and film. It's also almost certainly exaggerated. Here's what we know actually happened. Juana wanted Philip buried in Granada, the royal burial place of Castile, alongside her mother. This was entirely appropriate, but the journey required moving his coffin across plague-ravaged, famine-stricken Castile. She travelled with the funeral procession, heavily pregnant. In January 1507, she had to stop in the town of Torquemada because she was in labour. She gave birth to a daughter, Catalina, in difficult circumstances. After the birth, she wanted to continue the journey to Granada. Her refusal to immediately bury Philip and move on was seen as evidence of madness. But here's the context that gets left out. Philip had requested his heart be sent back to Burgundy. Knowing his followers, Juana may have wanted to verify that they hadn't taken his entire body. The coffin had to be opened periodically during embalming and transport. That was standard practice. And the prohibition of women near monastic premises? That was the monks' rules, not Juana's madness. Pedro Martir, the chronicler who travelled with Juana during this period and who was not her supporter, made no mention of her opening the coffin to kiss corpses or any necrophilic behaviour. These details appear later, in accounts by people who had much to gain from painting her as insane. What's certain is that Juana was grieving. She had lost the husband she loved obsessively, even though he'd betrayed her constantly. She'd just given birth alone. 4 of her children had been taken away to Flanders, raised by Philip's sister, and her father was circling, ready to take her throne. In July 1507, Ferdinand returned to Castile and met his daughter at Hornillos. He convinced, or forced, her to turn over the government to him. She made attempts to rule, revoking concessions Philip had made, trying to expel Flemish courtiers from power. For brief moments, she showed exactly the kind of intelligence and decisiveness that would have made her a capable queen. But she had no court, no resources, no support structure. Her father systematically replaced her loyal servants with his own men. Every person around her answered to Ferdinand, not to her. Then, in February 1509, Ferdinand had his daughter escorted to the castle palace of Tordesillas and confined there. The castle sits on a hill overlooking the Duero River, a beautiful but isolated location about 15 miles from Valladolid. It would be her prison for the rest of her life. Philip's coffin was placed at the nearby convent of Santa Clara, visible from her window but out of her reach. Her youngest daughter, Catalina, just 2 years old, was imprisoned with her. The child would know no other home for 16 years. The door closed, and it wouldn't open again for 46 years. At first, Juana's imprisonment wasn't total isolation. She had attendants, though all vetted by her father. She could move through certain parts of the castle. But Ferdinand called it protection. He said she needed to be guarded for her own health, that she was too fragile, too unstable, to handle the pressures of ruling or even ordinary life. The official story was that loving father was caring for his troubled daughter, but one of Juana's servants later testified that she was oppressed, detained by force, and imprisoned. Her warden, Mosen Ferrer, admitted to using la cuerda, that torture of suspension with weights, to force her to eat when she engaged in hunger strikes to protest her imprisonment. This wasn't medical care. This was punishment for resistance. Juana's acts of defiance were twisted into symptoms of madness. She refused to attend Mass at the convent because she couldn't see Philip's tomb, because going meant submitting to her captor's control. This was reframed as evidence that she was a heretic, that her religious skepticism from childhood had bloomed into full apostasy. She raged against her jailers, screaming at them, demanding her freedom, insisting she was the rightful queen. This became proof of violent madness, of delusions of grandeur. She refused to bathe or change her clothes for extended periods. This was presented as evidence she'd lost all sense of dignity and self-care, that she'd descended into filth and madness, or it was the behavior of a woman who had been betrayed by everyone she'd ever trusted and who had no power left except passive resistance. When Ferdinand died in 1516, Juana became Queen of Aragon, as well as Castile. Technically, she now ruled all of Spain, but her captors didn't even tell her he was dead. They blamed him for her imprisonment, keeping up the fiction that if he would only relent, she could be free. Her son Charles arrived from Flanders in 1517. He was 17 years old and had been raised by his Aunt Margaret, never knowing his mother. He visited Juana at Tordesillas and somehow convinced her to authorize him to rule alongside her as co-monarch. She signed the papers. Perhaps she hoped her son would be different. Perhaps she believed he would free her. Perhaps, after 8 years of isolation, she would have signed anything just to see a familiar face. Charles took the throne, and he never let his mother go. In fact, he made her imprisonment even more severe. He appointed the Marquis of Denia as her new warden and gave orders that no person speak with Her Majesty, for no good could come from it. Think about that. The Marquis warned Charles directly. It cannot be permitted that she speak with anybody because she would convince anyone. In other words, if people were actually allowed to talk to the Queen, they might realize she wasn't mad. They might start asking uncomfortable questions about why she was imprisoned. They might challenge Charles's authority, so she was kept in near total isolation. A handful of rooms in the castle, barred windows, locked doors, no visitors except her carefully vetted servants, no news from the outside world. Her son didn't even tell her when her father-in-law, Emperor Maximilian, died in 1519. For all intents and purposes, Juana was declared dead while still breathing. But in 1520, something extraordinary happened. Charles was elected Holy Roman Emperor and left Spain for Central Europe, and the Spanish people revolted. The Comunero revolt erupted across Castile. The rebels were tired of being ruled by a foreign-born king who couldn't speak Spanish properly and who treated Spain like a bank to fund his European ambitions. They wanted their real queen. They wanted Juana. In August 1520, rebel forces besieged Tordesillas and broke through. For the first time in 11 years, Juana's prison doors were opened from the outside. The Comuneros came to her, asking for her support, asking her to take back her throne, asking her to rule as she should have all along. And she hesitated. She met with rebel leaders. She listened to their grievances. She asked questions that showed she understood perfectly what was happening. Those who met with her testified that she was intelligent, engaged, speaking with prudence and judgment. Not mad, not incompetent, aware. But she'd been isolated for over a decade. Her children had been taken from her or raised to see her as insane. She'd been tortured, manipulated, lied to. And now both sides, the rebels and her son, were asking her to choose. She chose Charles. Or perhaps she simply didn't have the strength left to fight. The revolt was crushed. The last people who might have freed her were defeated, and her reward for supporting her son. He sent her daughter Catalina, now 16, and the only child who had stayed with her, away to marry King John III of Portugal in 1524. Juana was alone, completely, utterly alone. She would live in that castle for another 31 years. As decades passed, the isolation took its toll. The woman who had once been sharp, educated, fluent in 5 languages, who had debated with scholars and played music and danced, that woman slowly disappeared. She stopped bathing regularly. She stopped changing clothes. She became increasingly withdrawn, speaking less and less, retreating into a world inside her own mind. The few visitors who were permitted to see her in those later years described a ghost. She would sit for hours, staring out the window at the convent where Philip's body lay. She barely responded to questions. Her hair had gone grey and hung in tangles. Her fine gowns were replaced by simple, dirty robes. The beautiful princess who had once dazzled the Burgundian court was gone, replaced by a silent, haunted figure who seemed to exist more in memory than in the present. Was this evidence that she'd been mad all along? Or was it proof of what happens when you lock someone in a cage for decades, deny them human contact, strip away every relationship they value, and tell them they're insane so long and so consistently that reality itself becomes negotiable? Modern psychiatrists who've studied her case suggest she may have had depression, possibly bipolar disorder. Perhaps something inherited from her grandmother, Isabella of Portugal, who also suffered mental health issues. But they also note that her supposed symptoms are entirely consistent with someone suffering extreme psychological abuse and prolonged isolation. What's undeniable is this: every man who declared Juana mad had something to gain from it. Philip wanted to rule Castile through her, but couldn't control her jealousy and emotions, so he spread rumors of her madness to justify excluding her from power. Ferdinand wanted to keep ruling Castile after his wife's death, so he used his daughter's grief as an excuse to imprison her and steal her throne. Charles inherited his mother's kingdoms and needed her alive to legitimize his rule, but couldn't risk her actually ruling because she was, legally, the real monarch. For all three men, Juana alive but powerless was perfect. Juana dead would create succession crises, but Juana free, Juana ruling, that was unacceptable. So they did something worse than killing her. They erased her while she lived. On Good Friday, April 12th, 1555, at 75 years old, Queen Juana of Castile and Aragon died in her rooms at Tordesillas. She had been queen for 51 years. She had been a prisoner for 46 of them. She outlived all 4 of the men who'd imprisoned her. She outlived 4 of her 6 children. When she died, Spain had become the most powerful empire in the world, ruling vast territories in Europe and the Americas. All of it had been done in her name, by men who insisted she was too mad to participate in any of it. Her body was taken to Granada and buried in the royal chapel beside the parents who'd arranged her disastrous marriage, the husband who'd betrayed her, and the son who'd inherited the throne she never got to occupy. Her tomb is there still, marking the final resting place of a queen who never truly reigned. And the question remains, after all these centuries, was Juana of Castile mad? The evidence suggests she was passionate, yes. Probably depressed, particularly after trauma and loss. Emotionally volatile, certainly, though in circumstances that would break anyone. But was she the raving, necrophiliac lunatic of legend? Almost certainly not. The stories of her madness were exaggerated by the men who imprisoned her to justify their theft of her crown. And we are still telling those stories 500 years later, still calling her Joanna the Mad, still treating their propaganda as historical fact. Perhaps the real madness was what they did to her. Locking a woman away for half a century because she loved too much, grieved too deeply, and stood in the way of their ambitions. She was a queen, but the court declared her dead while she lived. And by the time she actually died, the erasure was so complete that most people had forgotten she'd ever existed at all. Throughout history, powerful men have had a convenient solution for inconvenient women: declare them mad. Juana of Castile's story is one of the most extreme examples, but it's far from unique. From medieval queens to Victorian women imprisoned in asylums for hysteria, the pattern repeats. A woman becomes inconvenient. A man declares her insane. The cage door closes. Juana ruled 2 kingdoms and never attended a single state meeting. She was queen for 5 decades and spent most of it locked behind walls. And all because grief, jealousy, and passion, emotions that would be seen as intense but understandable in a man, were twisted into evidence of madness in a woman who stood in the way of power. The men who imprisoned her are remembered as kings, emperors, the architects of Spain's golden age. She's remembered as the Mad Queen, reduced to a cautionary tale about emotional women who can't handle power. But maybe it's time we told the real story. Not of a mad queen, but of a queen driven mad by the cruelty of the men who couldn't stand that she was their equal. She was a queen, and they declared her dead while she lived. The scandal isn't that she was insane. The scandal is that we ever believed them. Juana of Castile spent half a century locked in a castle while men ruled in her name. But her story isn't just history, it's a warning. Because the world is full of inconvenient women and powerful men who would rather erase them than share power. If this story shocked you, if it made you question what else history has lied about, then you need to stick around. Because here at the Forgotten Court, we're uncovering the royal scandals they buried, the women they erased, the truths they rewrote. So hit that subscribe button, because next time, we're diving into another queen who was declared mad. But this one fought back in ways that nearly destroyed an empire. And trust me, what we uncover next will prove that Juana's story was just the beginning. The vaults are open, the secrets are coming out, and we're not stopping until every erased queen gets her story told.